Hello everyone, welcome back to a closer look at the Queen studio albums, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at Queen's 9th studio album, Flash Gordon. Flash Gordon was released in 1980. It was recorded by Queen and it was the soundtrack to the film Flash Gordon, released at the same time. This was Queen's first soundtrack they did, not to be their last, but in all honesty, I'm going to do a future album review, so I'll give you my thoughts on the album, but I thought this was actually a really good concept for an album, a very good idea, because it included a lot of the dialogue and sound effects from the film. In fact, listening to the album, it sounded like you were kind of had a mini abridged version of the film, and you were kind of listening to the audiobook, I guess, of the film. It's pretty cool. When it was released, didn't have the same kind of popularity as I give it. It reached only number 10 in the UK charts and didn't chart very highly around the world. It really wasn't a favourite of even the Queen fans. Didn't like it at the time. But I think it's a good concept to include, like the dialogue and the sound effects from the film. I haven't really seen that happen, except for maybe the Good Morning Vietnam soundtrack. It generally isn't done like that. Of course, like I said, it wasn't their first. It wasn't their only soundtrack album. Queen would go on to do the music for the film Highlander, and release songs on the A Kinda Magic album to complement that film soundtrack, and that is the next album we will be looking at in this series, A Kinda Magic. So, of course, we've got the film across all four formats. We've got vinyl, we've got CD, we've got cassette tape, and we've got SACD. And listening to this album, I gotta say, very interesting results. I do have a favourite, which one I've chosen to my preferred way to watch it. It's not what I thought it'd be either. It's really interesting. Now, the sessions for Flash Gordon began, it was actually split up into two different sessions. The first sessions began February and January of 1980. They worked for a month laying down initial tracks, and then they concluded those sessions in October and November of 1980, ready for the December 1980 launch of the album. And Queen did release the album as a studio album. I don't really see it as a studio album. It is a soundtrack album, and so it's not really typical of Queen in the way that they would make their music. In fact, this is probably the first time Queen had to work to somebody else's deadline for the release of this soundtrack, or the production of the soundtrack. But the recording studios were Utopia Studios in London, the Townhouse Studios in London, and the Anvil Studios, and Howard Blake did some incidental orchestration as well, found on the album and in the film as well, that didn't appear on the album. So the album was recorded, split over a year, only in like about 4 months' time, so it was pretty quick. But the interesting thing is that this album was literally recorded concurrently with the game, which we looked at in the last video. Mac was on board again for the engineering or mastering of the album, working with Queen, and Brian May was a producer as well as Mac, which I think it's clear that like Brian May's fingerprints are all over this album, which I'll get to in a minute. But yeah, recorded between those two sessions, but it's really interesting because it was recorded concurrently with the game, but it came out after the game, and it's just interesting to hear the difference in audio fidelity between, those two albums. The game obviously was recorded at the Musicland Studios in Germany on a 24-track reel-to-reel. Flash Gordon was recorded at the studios I mentioned in London on a 32-track reel-to-reel machine. And I really do think the equipment used really speaks about the quality of the work produced. The game, I would say, is a far better produced album. The Flash Gordon, really, you can hear the limitations of the equipment that was used. Having more tracks does not necessarily mean you're going to get better audio quality. It's really interesting. Now, It's also been mastered many times over the years. The first one, obviously, being in 1980 with the Queen and Mac mastering release of the album in both America and in the UK. America had the Elektra Records version, and the UK had the EMI version. And the CD release used the same album master from the original release. Then in 1991, Hollywood Records got Stephen Mackison to remaster the album for a release in the USA. And then in 1994, Kevin Metcalf was brought on board to do the Digital Master Series. So he did the remaster of the album for that. In 2001, Peter Mew did a remaster for the Japanese mini LP series, which this album got released in 2004. And in 2008, Kevin Metcalf's remaster was used for a Spanish-only release on Queen CD book. Quite a special Spanish-only release where you get the book about the album and the lyrics contained within and the album. And then in 2011, Bob Ludwig did the remaster for Island Records of this album, released on CD and in Japan, and in 2012 it was released on SACD. So, what formats have we got? Well, obviously got it on vinyl, we've got it on tape, we've got it on the CD, and we've got it on SACD. But I will say this now, my vinyl version is not the original master, sadly. This is the Hollywood Records remaster from 1991. I didn't even realize it's actually quite a thick vinyl. I don't know if it's the same like heavy grade as the studio vinyl collection that was released, but this is from the Hollywood's Records remaster. Very interesting listening to. I'll get to that in a second. For the cassette tape, I've got the Kevin Metcalf Digital Master Series with the nice sticker on there. Interesting listen. Again, I will get into this. The track order is identical. Usually, sometimes on tape it changes. On the CD, we have the 2004, I guess it is, but the 2001 Peter Mew master. So all three are the remasters so far. And of course, on SACD, there is the Bob Ludwig remaster for Island Records. Now, I don't have the original album to listen to on physical media. I do have on my PC a vinyl rip of the original album at 24 bits and 192 kilohertz. I listen to that at reference level just so I can get a base for what the Queen sort of release was, because that obviously is the official release. Everyone else's remaster is then their interpretation, you know, using better equipment, more modern techniques, but it's their interpretation of Queen's original work. So listening to the original album is a very mixed bag. Obviously split over two sides on the vinyl, A and B. They're very different in the mastering. There's a lot more noise on side A than there is on side B. The songs generally tend to get louder towards the end on side B, with different sounds coming through more prominently on side B than they were on side A, and the reverse. More sounds on side A coming through more than they did on side B. The side A was very quiet. It was under the reference level for hearing all the sounds on the album. I had to actually turn it up, you know, to be able to hear it was about like 10 decibels below reference level, which obviously amplifies the sort of the noise level. So I could actually hear tape hiss at the beginning on side A quite clearly, especially on the first three tracks where it's mainly dialogue. Now, I've split the album, as it were, over 4 different categories of what is on these albums. The first category is Queen's instrumentation, and I'm talking about Brian's drum kit, John's bass guitar, Brian May's guitar work, Freddie's vocals. Okay, that's the Queen instrumentation that I'll talk about. Second category is the dialogue from the film that was mixed into the soundtrack. Third category is the special effects sounds that were also mixed into the soundtrack. And the fourth category being the synth work, which is very heavy featured on this album on both sides. They really got to know that sort of Obermann synthesizer on this album. Introduced on the game, but really heavily used. So when I talk about the different sounds, it's those four categories that I'll be referring to. Now, what I try and listen out for is, like, my setup. I sit in the middle of my speakers, which are about 7, maybe 8 meters away from me. And I sit dead center, and they are about 3 or 4 meters from the wall as well. So I get a good spatial sound. You know, the speakers are about 8 feet, you know, away from each other. So there's a good triangulation between me and the speaker. So I hear the stereo imaging very nicely. It actually creates a phantom center as well, which you can hear in the vocals, in Freddie's vocals. But then, you know, depending on how they've mixed it, you know, there's sounds that come from the left and come from the right uniquely or in unison. So that's how I listen to all my music, to be honest. But the mixing of this album is very interesting. You know, it's on side A. Let's talk about side A first. So side A, the dialogue and the special effects and the synth work is very high in the mix. The Queen instrumentation is very low in the mix. In some songs, like the Flash song, like drums, Roger's drum kit isn't clearly heard. You know, the fidelity of each drum and the bass kick and the sound, the high end of the cymbals and the hi-hats aren't really clearly heard. Usually on a Queen album, the separation between those instruments or those sounds is very clearly heard, very well rounded, you know, and sounds very nice. But in this one, a little bit muddy, you know, and lower volume. Now on side B, it's flipped. The Queen instrumentation starts off at a certain level and then just gets louder towards the end, whereas the dialogue seems to be at this certain level and just stays there, you know, and the sound effects kind of go with the Queen music and getting louder, and the synth work is louder on side B than it is on side A. It's a real mixed bag of sounds, and like I said, the overall volume of the album is very low. The reference level, it was like 10 decibels below reference level. I had to turn it up. You know, if I had left it as was, I wouldn't have heard half the album. The sounds, the atmospheric sounds, I wouldn't have heard the tapists, but the vocals would be very hard to hear. Because it's a very quiet album, I would say, when you compare it to like A Night at the Opera, The Game, you know, things like that. And again, what I listen for is the separation between the instruments, the separation between Freddie's front vocals and any background vocals. I also listen out for how the stereo field is being used when you've got certain sounds coming out one speaker and then the other, or how they've utilized that stereo image. I'm also listening to the fidelity of the instruments, like not just the clarity, but how deeper the bass is, or how clear high end it is, or is it a muddy middle, or is it a well-rounded middle. They're the sort of things that I'm looking out for. Okay, so let's get to it. So I'm going to open this up so you, just in case you haven't seen what it looks like inside. It's quite an interesting album. So Flash Gordon, lovely, bold, you know, front cover. You've got the Flashman himself on the back there. Yeah! And then you've got the track listing down here, and it opens up, and you have a insert, which is actually where the record should sit. The insert like that. But if I do put it in, it's very hard to get out, so I don't. I leave it off. The center is like that on both sides, and like I said, it's a very thick vinyl. You know, it's not thin, flimsy. And this all replicates what the original release looked like. You've got this, which, you know, when you put the vinyl in, you'll see the artwork in the spindle. So you got the artwork there, very nice, and then you've got the track listing, the credits, and all this, and sort of who did what, you know, really nice. So that's what the album looks like. Now the vinyl sound. Obviously, the vinyl sound has got its own limitations. It doesn't have as much dynamic sort of decibel range or dynamic frequency response as SACD or even CD, but it is a pleasant listen, you know. This particular vinyl, the Hollywood Records remaster, again, was 10 decibels below reference level listening to it. So I had to pump up the volume, which meant increasing the noise floor. So obviously my record player, the receiver, has a phone amp within it and does like a de-hum on it. So I don't hear the hum of the electrics. Doesn't take away from the audio quality. But if that has any bearing on the volume of the album, I don't think so, because The Game and The Night of the Opera, they were considerably louder than this one, to be fair. So I don't think the quietness of the album was down to this. But what I did find, the difference between listening to this version and the original, is it seemed to have a little bit more compression. You know, there were times when I could hear distortion, where during the songs like The Hero, Flash's theme, and any other song that really pumped out a lot, I could hear actually distortion in the mix. And I think whoever remastered this maybe just increased the volume, even though it was still the same 10 decibels below reference. I think the volume had been increased for this, and then they compressed it to make it fit, or on the I don't know. The mastering on this I don't like. It's a lot different to the original album, and it's a lot different to the other three formats I'm about to talk about. It made Brian's guitars really loud, and I don't know if that's Brian doing his usual thing, but it made Brian's guitar work really loud. It made Roger's drums really muddy, more muddier than the original album. It kind of lost a little bit of bass as well. It felt like there was something missing when I was listening to this on both side and side B. The volume, from what I heard in the original, was still there, in terms of it's very quiet on side A to begin with. You know, even the first song, Flash, doesn't come out pumping as much as it does The Hero on side B. That one is like a Queen song. That one is what everybody, I think, was expecting this album to be like. Pure rock and roll, The Hero. But that's really loud. That's really pumping. Whereas Flash's theme wasn't actually that pumping. So yeah, this listening to this is not my favorite way of listening to this album from Hollywood Records, the remaster. They've messed with it in a bad way. I think they've tried to overcome hiss, and that's removed some substance from the album, because it definitely lacked the bass. In fact, when I listened to the tape version, the Digital Master Series, this had more bass in it than the vinyl record. Now, tape is more restrictive and limited than vinyl record in terms of its decibel and its frequency response range. This can't pick up as like the same kind of bass that a vinyl record can pick up and produce. But this actually had more. Now, this obviously, Kevin Metcalf mastered this for the Digital Master Series. This sounds completely different to this version here. The differences between these two is that on this, the drums are not muddy. They're well rounded. They're well defined. You can hear them. The high ends, they're there, but they don't sound as high end as they do on the Hollywood Records remaster. That might be a format thing. It sounds like there's a cloth over the speakers. I think that's the tape, but there is a high end there. Like, I actually prefer this over the Hollywood Records remaster. It's not as close to the original. Neither are, to be honest. This still has changes I can hear where they've tried to make things level out. Because at the end of the day, I think Flash Gordon is a quiet album in terms of how Brian May and Mac and Queen, you know, mastered it originally. Using 1980s technology, you know, literally straight out the 70s, at a different studio that they're not familiar with, on a 32 track machine, which means there's more tracks, there's more noise, and that is evident on here. Now, I didn't actually hear much tape hiss. In terms of reference level, I only had to turn this up by 5 decibels. So this is like 5 decibels below reference, whereas the vinyl record, 10. Like, this sounded better than the vinyl record did. Like, seriously. The Digital Master Series had more perceived bass, didn't have as clear high end, like the cymbal crashes and any sound effects that were in the high end of the frequency range, but it was there, and it was loud. It just wasn't as like, it's like a cloth was over the speaker, you know, muffling some of that clarity of the high end. But yeah, Brian's guitars on both versions are really ramped up, you know, louder than Roger's drum kit. And in all honesty, I don't remember hearing anything of John's bass much. Only the first and last song, and that was it. I didn't really was able to make out on like either of these two versions John's bass. Freddie's vocals are clear, you know. In fact, this sounded more natural than the vinyl record did. This sounded processed and clipped. This sounded natural. Out of the two, I way prefer the tape. Just to make it like complete, let's have a look inside the tape. So you get the card there, nice. You got the lyrics there, and then it opens up and it advertises what else they're selling. You know, the rest of the album's there as an advert, as Queen do, which is fine. It's business. Yeah, really enjoyed listening to the tape, but it's not my preferred. The Japanese mini LP now. These are so cute. Like, this replicates the original vinyl release. The color between all of these does kind of change from bright yellow to sort of like creamy yellow, but yeah, it does actually replicate the vinyl. And it also has the little mini insert as well, which it replicates on both sides, okay? And it also has, in a tiny little elephant condom, look how cute that is, the CD, which this replicates the inner artwork of the vinyl. Like, these are so cute, and it honestly has everything. I mean, it's tiny writing. I can't make out half that, blind bat I am. Now, the sound quality on the CD version, right? This is the Peter Mew Master from 2001, released in 2004. And I gotta say, this blows the vinyl and the tape out the water. This has everything. In terms of reference level, I would say it hit reference level and went above it. It was a bit like 2 decibels, maybe 3 above reference level. I didn't change, like, I didn't tone it down to adjust, but this definitely is a bit louder than the other two, possibly because it's on CD. It has a wider dynamic range, more decibels to play with. I think it's like 90 decibels or something for the CD. The tape, I don't know, but the vinyl has about 75 or 70. Tape's probably got about 60. But this one, yeah, has more room for the album to breathe, basically. And it does. It has great bass, really clear high end. Does have a minor bit of tape hiss, but it wasn't as much as I heard on the original, which had lots, was the one with the most. Hollywood Records remaster, it sounds like they denoised it. I didn't hear as much from the original. And the tape, I didn't hear as much, but it was there. Probably a smidgen more than the Hollywood Records version, but this one didn't hear any. Like, they cleaned this up, but it still had the bass. Everything was clear, the high ends. This beats the tape. Like, I prefer this version over the tape and vinyl, you know? Like, this is a really nice version of it. It doesn't mess either. Like, well, actually, no, it does mess with it. Like, it wasn't quiet. It hit reference level, which means because the original was below, they have actually increased the volume on this sucker, you know? They haven't messed with the dynamics, though. They haven't compressed anything and changed the dynamics between, you know, within the mix. Like, I still heard everything as I heard on the album, but just a few decibels louder, you know? So, like, they might have upped the volume, but they haven't, like, normalized it, you know, and compressed it. Like, this was really nice, but not my favorite. My favorite was Bob Ludwig's 2012 SACD version, which I've put in the 2-disc, you know, CD version. I've cannibalized. I don't even know where the original CD case is, but I've used the original 2-disc release for 2011 of the album, and I think I've probably given them to my kids, those CDs, and then used it for the original case for the SACD. So this, now I gotta say, this was more quiet than the CD by about 4 decibels. It was lower in volume, which was surprising me, than the CD version. It was actually a really pleasant listen to. Absolutely no hiss, you know, but it had the bass response, the clarity. It had what I wished the vinyl had. It had what I wished the tape had. It had everything. It was the best way to listen to this album. It was so beautiful. Like, the high, I mean, clearly the quality of this format, 24 bits, 96 kilohertz, was way better than what the album's quality was, because I heard everything and I knew it could have done more. Like, Bob Ludwig did not add more bass, you know, didn't change the balancing of the sound's tone, you know, kept it as it was, but just put it the way it should have been, you know. Obviously has increased. This is louder than the original album version that I heard, and it's louder than the vinyl record, the Hollywood Records remaster I heard, because that was 10 decibels under reference. This one was probably about 2 decibels under reference. I didn't change the reference level. I listened to it like that. And it sounds like if I'd have turned it up a little bit, I'd have got more out of it. But this was perfect to listen to. This is my preferred version to listen to this album. You know, it has no flaws. It has everything you want. You know, the separation between the instruments, the sound of the dialogue, again, has that side A, it's quite loud, and then side B, it's kind of in the mix. Whereas Queen's instrumentation on side A is quite lower, it's quite quiet, but then on side B, it slowly ramps up to a powerful end. And that's exactly what this does. Like, my preferred version, SACD, of The Flash, really enjoyed it. That's basically it, you know. Like I said, I'm going to do an album review of all of these albums. But next video, we're going to be looking in the next episode at a kind of magic across the 4 formats: tape, vinyl, CD, and SACD. I'm really looking forward to that, because that's actually a really, there's a few tracks on there I really like. So I'm really looking forward to doing that. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you get something out of it. Join me on for the next one, and I'll see you guys later. Take care. Bye.